Emily Carter walked up the steps of the military transport jet like she belonged there. Her boots thumped lightly against the metal, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the roar of the engines warming below. She carried a small duffel bag over her shoulder, worn leather scuffed at the corners, the kind that had been with her on more than a dozen deployments, not as a pilot this time, but as a passenger. The crew didn't know that. The other passengers didn't know that. Not yet. To the untrained eye, she was just the pilot's wife. The woman who smiled politely at everyone, who carried herself with a quiet elegance, who wasn't supposed to do anything beyond sit quietly and avoid trouble. But Emily's eyes, blue, sharp, unflinching, told a different story. They scanned the aircraft as if memorizing every detail, every instrument panel through the glass of the cockpit doors, the placement of safety rails, the positioning of emergency hatches. Every noise registered. Every vibration underfoot whispered a secret she had learned to read over years in the Air Force. The cargo bay was a humming metal cocoon. Crates clanked gently as crewmen secured supplies, and the smell of engine oil mixed with the faint tang of ozone from the electronic systems. A young sergeant glanced at her as she walked past, his eyes flicking to her wedding band. He nodded politely, but his lips curled into a subtle smirk. "Pilot's wife, huh?" he muttered to a buddy, voice just low enough to be safe. "Bet she doesn't even know the difference between the throttle and the brake." Emily heard him. She didn't flinch. She let a faint, polite smile grace her lips, the kind of smile that could fool anyone who didn't know better. Inside, her pulse was calm, a deliberate rhythm honed from decades of high-stakes situations where even a fraction of a second could mean the difference between life and death. She had been here before. Not like this, but close enough to recognize the feeling, the prelude to chaos. She found her seat, 3A, the one closest to the forward section, right behind the cockpit. She slid into it with a quiet grace, buckling herself in, eyes never leaving the cockpit door. Reed, her husband and the pilot, was already in the cockpit. She could see the faint tilt of his shoulders, the way he shifted his weight as he ran his hands along the controls. He was tense. He always was before takeoff, especially on a flight like this. Reed wasn't just flying a routine transport mission. This flight carried sensitive cargo across rugged terrain, the kind that tested even the most experienced pilots. Emily adjusted her seatbelt and leaned back. The jet vibrated beneath her, engines thrumming with anticipation. The other passengers were chatting quietly, some nervous, some oblivious. She heard snippets of their conversations, half-formed jokes about base assignments, promotions, leave requests. She let the sound wash over her without reacting. She didn't need to react, not yet. Then the jet shuddered. A small, almost imperceptible tremor at first, something a casual passenger might ignore. But Emily's head snapped up instantly. Her eyes narrowed. That tremor wasn't casual. It was mechanical, subtle, precise. The kind of tremor that meant something was about to go very wrong. She scanned the cockpit, watching Reed's hands fly over the instruments, the way his jaw tightened, the way the co-pilot's eyes flickered with a fraction of panic. The cabin lights dimmed for a fraction of a second, enough for Emily to notice the flicker. She didn't panic. She never panicked. Not in the air, not in combat, not ever. But she felt that old familiar tightening in her chest, the one that told her instinctively that this flight would demand everything she had, more than she had ever given before. A sudden vibration ran through the fuselage, stronger this time, rattling the seats and sending a tin cup clattering across a service tray. The young sergeant who had whispered about her wedding band froze, then looked around nervously. Other passengers whispered questions. What was that? Is this normal? Emily heard each one clearly, though she said nothing. She let the tension grow just enough to sharpen their senses, to prepare them for what they didn't know was coming. Reed's voice came through the intercom, calm but with the edge of tension no one else could detect. All crew, prepare for departure. He didn't glance at her. He didn't need to. He knew she was here. He knew she was watching. Emily tightened her grip on the armrest. She had to focus. Every detail mattered. Every sound, every vibration, every flicker of an instrument panel was a piece of the puzzle. She ran scenarios through her mind. hydraulic failure, engine stall, electrical short. All of them were possible. Some of them would be catastrophic. She calculated distances, angles, altitudes, the margin for error. And she realized, almost before she allowed herself to admit it, that she might have to take control of this aircraft herself. The thought was not frightening. It was logical, necessary. She had trained for this her entire life. Not as a passenger, not as the pilot's wife, but as Sparrow, the call sign that once made even seasoned pilots respect her. The engines roared, the vibration becoming a steady hum under her seat. The aircraft taxied down the runway, metal wheels grinding against asphalt. Emily could feel the subtle shifts in momentum as the jet picked up speed, as Reed tested the controls. The co-pilot leaned forward, scanning instruments with a furrowed brow. Everyone in the cabin assumed this was routine, but Emily knew better. She could sense the subtle fluctuations in hydraulic pressure. She could hear the difference in the engine pitch. She could feel the micro-shifts in weight as the aircraft reacted to the wind. And then, just as the jet lifted off, leaving the runway behind, a sudden, sharp alarm sounded from the cockpit. A shrill, mechanical scream that cut through the hum of engines and the low murmur of the cabin. Emily's pulse didn't skip a beat, but her hands tightened on the armrests. Her eyes flicked to the cockpit door. Reed's voice came through the intercom, strained this time, urgent. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Repeat, hydraulic pressure dropping. The co-pilot's eyes widened. Passengers murmured in confusion, glancing around at one another. Some clutched the armrests instinctively. Emily's mind raced. She had to act. She could already predict the next few seconds. Turbulence, system failure, possible fire in the aft cargo bay. She didn't hesitate. Emily unbuckled herself smoothly, her movements precise despite the tremors shaking the fuselage. She moved toward the cockpit with purpose, her eyes never leaving the door, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring ready to release. The young sergeant tried to stop her, grabbing her arm. "Ma'am, you can't." Emily turned to him, her gaze icy. "If that door doesn't open, we're all going to die. You think I'm joking?" The sergeant hesitated. He could feel the calm authority in her voice, the way it brooked no argument, the way it carried a weight far beyond what any pilot's wife should ever possess. Something in him shifted, and he swiped his access card. The lock clicked. Emily stepped into the cockpit, heat and smoke already licking the edges of the panels. Sparks danced across the console, throwing shadows across Reed's pale, tense face. His eyes met hers, a mix of shock and recognition. "Emily, what?" he started. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hands moved instinctively over the yoke, adjusting, stabilizing, compensating. The alarm screamed, lights flickered, the aircraft shuddered. But Emily Carter, Sparrow, was already in control. The passengers in the cabin had no idea what was happening. They only knew the sudden shift in energy, the way tension suddenly gripped the air like a living thing. Something extraordinary was unfolding, and no one, not even Reed, could predict the outcome. Emily's eyes were locked on the instruments, scanning, calculating, anticipating. The first move had been made, and now everything hung on what she did next. The jet pitched slightly, a violent shudder running through it, and in that moment everyone knew they were no longer passengers. They were participants in a fight for survival. And Emily Carter, the woman they thought was just the pilot's wife, was ready to do whatever it took to save them all. The aircraft shuddered violently as if the sky itself had turned against it. A high-pitched alarm screamed from the cockpit, sending passengers into a nervous frenzy. Emily Carter's eyes snapped toward the source, the panel ahead flickering red, the warning lights reflecting in the polished metal of the cabin walls. The hum of the engines had turned into a jagged, grinding noise that vibrated up through the seats and into the bones. Captain Reed Carter gritted his teeth, one hand pressing desperately on the yoke, the other frantically tapping switches and buttons. "Hydraulics are failing," he barked into the intercom. "We're losing primary control. Brace for turbulence." The sudden tilt of the plane caught everyone off guard. Cargo shifted violently, lurching across the floor as straps groaned under the strain. A crate of equipment toppled, slamming against the wall with a deafening clang. The noise, metallic and monstrous, echoed through the fuselage, making the passengers jump. Emily didn't flinch. She unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed off the wall with precise, fluid movements honed by years of training. Her duffel bag fell forgotten to the floor. Oxygen masks dropped, dangling like plastic ghosts in the shaking cabin, and she clipped hers on without hesitation. "Ma'am, you need to sit," yelled a sergeant, trying to steady himself amid the chaos. Emily ignored him. Her mind was already racing through the aircraft's systems, diagnosing the problem before anyone else could understand the gravity. She didn't need instruments to tell her what was happening. She could feel it in the vibrations, in the unnatural angle of the wings, in the subtle shudder of the fuselage as it fought against gravity. Her pulse was steady, calm, calculating. This was more than a mechanical failure. Something had gone critically wrong. Electrical systems were sparking. Hydraulic lines were bleeding pressure. Stabilizers were twitching unnaturally, threatening to send the jet into a tailspin. Emily's experience, her lifetime of reflexes built on the split-second decision-making of test flights, combat missions, and simulated emergencies, told her that the next few seconds would be critical. The aircraft pitched violently to the left. Crew members screamed as they were thrown sideways, some grabbing for support while others hit the cabin walls. A young lieutenant tumbled into a pile of cargo, cursing, his helmet clanging against metal. The co-pilot, eyes wide, fought to regain control. "We're losing her," he shouted, voice cracking. "I can't maintain altitude." Emily's gaze was locked on the cockpit door. She could see Reed struggling, coughing, sweat streaking his face as he fought with a panel sparking intermittently. Sparks leaped from exposed wires like angry fireflies, illuminating his strained expression. Smoke began curling upward, pungent and acrid, stinging Emily's nostrils through the oxygen mask. She took a deep breath. Her mind raced, calculating every possible outcome. She had trained for emergencies like this. Not as a passenger, but she had been ready all along for the exact situation she now faced. A sudden jolt threw a crewman off balance, sending him sprawling across the floor. Emily seized a handrail, steadying herself as she ran toward the cockpit. The plane pitched again, harder this time, the fuselage twisting slightly in the turbulence. The overhead panels rattled, and a section of lighting flickered out entirely. "Open that door," Emily shouted, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the din. The young sergeant who tried to stop her hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. He had heard rumors, maybe even stories, about Sparrow, the legendary pilot who had disappeared from the roster years ago, but he couldn't reconcile the woman before him with the mythical figure. Her calm, precise movements betrayed experience far beyond what he had ever seen from anyone in this cabin. "I'm not letting anyone through," he said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Emily's eyes locked on his. "If that door isn't open right now, we're all going to die. Do you understand me?" For a tense heartbeat, no one moved. The aircraft groaned, metal twisting under stress, a sound that made the hairs on Emily's arms rise. She knew that if they didn't act now, the plane wouldn't just be in trouble, it would be lost. She saw the fear in the sergeant's eyes, but more importantly, she saw the recognition. She wasn't bluffing. He swiped his card. The lock clicked. The door swung open and Emily stepped inside. The cockpit was chaos incarnate. Smoke curled around instruments, a faint orange glow of fire licking the edges of panels. Reed was slumped sideways, coughing, his uniform streaked with sweat and grime. Sparks from a fried console arced toward him, illuminating his pale, strained face. "Emily," he rasped, disbelief cutting through the smoke. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She moved instinctively to the yoke, her hands finding the controls as if they had never left her grasp. The co-pilot glanced at her, eyes wide. "Wait, you're not just." Her calm gaze cut him off. "We don't have time, focus." The aircraft shuddered again, more violently this time, pitching downward as though gravity itself had decided to test them. Emily felt the shift beneath her hands, the subtle loss of pressure in the control surfaces. She adjusted, compensating instinctively, her muscles reacting faster than the co-pilot's mind could process. Alarms screamed, lights flickered, and the plane groaned under the strain. But Emily didn't panic. She had faced situations like this before, though never like this, never with a full crew relying on her as an unknown variable. And yet, instinct and training collided perfectly. Her fingers danced over the yoke, her mind calculating every counterbalance, every angle, every micro-adjustment required to stabilize the aircraft. The co-pilot stumbled, nearly losing his balance, and glanced at her in awe. You're Sparrow." Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't speak. She had no time. Outside, the world blurred into streaks of white and gray as the jet struggled to maintain altitude. The mountains below were jagged, black shadows against a storming sky. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the clouds like the flash of steel. She could feel every shift, every subtle tug of wind, every microsecond of imbalance. The plane was alive under her hands, screaming in protest, and she treated it like a partner, not a machine. Another lurch threw passengers against their straps, some gasping for breath, some crying out in terror. Emily ignored them, focusing only on the instruments, the controls, the critical balance between survival and disaster. She calculated trajectories, projected altitudes, and made micro-adjustments in a perfect dance that kept the aircraft from plummeting entirely. Reed, now semi-conscious, groaned from his seat. "Emily, don't, I can." She gripped his hand tightly. "Just breathe, I've got this." Her voice, calm and commanding, cut through the chaos. The co-pilot, still wide-eyed, finally regained his composure and assisted her, following her lead as she guided the failing aircraft with precision. Every minute, every second, every heart-pounding moment demanded her total focus. Outside, the ground rushed closer, mountains looming like walls of jagged stone. The cabin trembled as if the aircraft might break apart under the stress. Emily didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid of the plane. She wasn't afraid of the fire, the smoke, the alarms, or even death. Her focus was absolute, her instincts flawless, her resolve unshakable. And then the first unmistakable signs of structural stress appeared. A metallic groan, a panel sliding slightly out of place, a spark erupting from an exposed circuit. The aircraft was punishing them, testing every ounce of their skill, and Emily welcomed the challenge. "Brace for sudden turbulence," she shouted into the intercom, her calm voice a lifeline to terrified passengers. "Stay in your seats, strap in, eyes forward." The plane lurched downward again, faster this time, the ground rushing up through the windows like a living threat. Emily adjusted, yoke and pedals moving in perfect harmony, fighting against physics, fighting against chaos itself. She had seconds to save hundreds of lives, and she didn't waste one. Every passenger, every crew member, every piece of cargo, they were all counting on her, and she wouldn't fail. Not here, not now, not ever. The jet pitched violently to one side, the engine screaming in protest. Emily's hands tightened on the yoke, her eyes scanning every gauge, every light, every vibration. She was calculating, reacting, anticipating. The plane was alive, thrumming with tension, and she was its conductor, its master. And as the aircraft trembled on the edge of disaster, Emily Carter, Sparrow, knew the moment had come. She had to take full control. Not later, not when the alarm stopped, not when Reed recovered. Now, Emily Carter's boots thudded against the fuselage floor as she moved down the narrow aisle toward the cockpit. Each step was measured, deliberate, precise, despite the violent shudders of the aircraft beneath her. She could feel the vibrations through her bones, each tremor a warning, a whisper from the plane itself that time was running out. The oxygen mask covered her mouth, but not her mind. Her thoughts were razor-sharp, calculating every microsecond, every angle, every failing system. The cockpit door loomed ahead, cold and metallic, a barrier between life and catastrophe. She banged on it, each strike echoing inside the fuselage like a gunshot. "Reed, open it now." No response. Through the small cockpit window, she could see smoke curling around the edges, flames licking the panels, and her husband slumped in his seat, coughing violently. Sparks danced across the instruments, casting eerie, flickering shadows over his pale, tense face. The co-pilot struggled with the yoke, eyes wide, adrenaline visible in every muscle of his body. Emily's chest tightened, not with fear but with urgency. The seconds stretched like hours. If she didn't get inside, the aircraft would spiral out of control. Every system failing was another second lost, another step closer to catastrophe. A young sergeant intercepted her in the narrow corridor, trying to grab her arm. "Ma'am, you can't go in there, it's not safe." Emily turned sharply, her eyes flashing steel. "If that door isn't open right now, we're all going to die. Do you understand me?" The sergeant hesitated. He could feel the weight of her command, the absolute certainty in her voice. She wasn't bluffing. Something in him shifted. He swiped his access card. The lock clicked, a sound that felt like the breaking of a dam. Emily shoved the door open and stepped into the cockpit. Heat and smoke hit her immediately, acrid and suffocating. Sparks erupted from exposed wires, sending tiny fire streaks across the panels. The smell of burning electronics filled her nose, a reminder that the aircraft's systems were failing fast. Reed's head lifted slightly, his eyes widened at the sight of her. "Emily, what?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hands moved to the controls instinctively, fingers finding switches, yoke, and throttles with a precision that made the co-pilot stare in awe. The plane shuddered violently, tilting downward. Alarms blared. The fuselage groaned as if crying out under the stress. Emily's focus narrowed to a razor-sharp point. She could feel the imbalance, the failing hydraulics, the jittering stabilizers, the almost imperceptible loss of thrust from the engines. Every micro-adjustment, every twitch of the yoke, every slight turn of the pedals mattered. One wrong move and they would plummet. The co-pilot's voice trembled. "Wait, you're Sparrow." Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't confirm, she couldn't, not yet. Right now there was no room for explanations, only action. She reached for the throttle, adjusting with subtle, calculated movements. Sparks erupted again from a console near Reed's knee. Emily's eyes flicked to him. His pulse was rapid, shallow. He was semi-conscious, barely able to assist. His hands twitched, trying to help, but she gently pressed his arm down. "Focus on breathing. That's all you do," she said calmly, almost soothingly, despite the roaring chaos around them. The plane lurched again, violently this time. The co-pilot gritted his teeth, fingers white on the yoke, struggling to maintain altitude. Emily adjusted the trim, pushing the failing hydraulic system to its limits. The aircraft groaned, panels rattling, lights flickering, but it remained just barely in the sky. Emily's mind raced. She calculated distances, altitudes, and angles. The nearest safe landing zone was still hundreds of miles away. If the plane lost any more systems, they wouldn't make it. She had to improvise. She had to fight physics itself. She could feel the plane's distress like a living thing. Every vibration, every tilt, every groan was a scream begging for control, for stability. And she provided it. Her hands, steady as stone, moved with the calm precision of someone who had faced impossible situations before and survived. Reed coughed violently. "Emily, do." She gripped his hand firmly. "SHH, I've got this, just breathe." The co-pilot's eyes widened as he realized the truth. They were no longer relying on Reed. They were relying on her. A woman who, to the world, was just a pilot's wife. But to anyone who knew, to anyone who remembered the legend of Sparrow, she was something far more. The jet pitched downward again, faster this time. The ground rushed closer through the smoky cockpit windows. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the mountains like jagged blades. Emily adjusted the yoke, countering the tilt with subtle, microsecond movements. She was in perfect sync with the aircraft, guiding it as if it were an extension of her own body. The co-pilot swallowed hard. You've flown in worse conditions than this." Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the instruments, scanning, calculating, predicting. The plane shuddered violently, sparks erupting from a failing control panel. Oxygen masks rattled as the cabin trembled beneath them. The crew, passengers, and cargo were all counting on her, and she could feel the weight of every life on her shoulders. She had to make a decision. Reed was incapacitated. The co-pilot was overwhelmed. The aircraft was failing. She keyed the radio. "Mayday, this is Sparrow. All crew prepare for emergency maneuvering. I am taking control." A moment of stunned silence answered her over the intercom. Then a crackling voice responded, disbelief in every word. "Sparrow, that can't be right." Emily's jaw set. "It's right, and we don't have much time." She scanned the instruments, assessing the damage. The left hydraulic line was completely destroyed. Stabilizers were partially offline. The right engine was overheating, tail rudder unresponsive. Every system failure was critical. The co-pilot glanced at her, panic in his eyes. We ca." Emily cut him off. "Yes, we can. Focus on what I tell you. Do exactly as I say." The plane lurched again, violently, as though protesting her control. Sparks shot from the exposed panels, smoke curling into their faces. Emily adjusted throttle and trim simultaneously, guiding the aircraft into a more stable trajectory. The instruments flickered, warning alarms blaring, but she remained composed. "Altitude is dropping," the co-pilot shouted, panic rising in his voice. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Not if I can help it. Keep her steady. Follow my lead." The jet skimmed a jagged mountain ridge, snow and debris flaring off the peaks. Emily adjusted with micro-precision, balancing the aircraft's weight against failing systems. Her hands moved instinctively, smoothly, guided by decades of training, adrenaline, and instinct. Reed watched her, awe and fear in his eyes. "Emily, I don't understand." "Don't think," she said softly, almost a whisper. "Just trust me." Another violent shudder rocked the plane. Sparks exploded from the electronics near Reed's knee. Emily didn't flinch. She maintained her grip, pushing every ounce of strength, focus, and skill into controlling the crippled aircraft. The co-pilot mirrored her movements, trying to stabilize what he couldn't fully comprehend. Outside, storm clouds roiled, lightning illuminating the jagged peaks below. The aircraft pitched, rolled, and groaned, but Emily held it together. Each second was a battle. Each micro-adjustment was a victory against the inevitability of disaster. And then, through the haze of smoke and sparks, Emily saw a moment of opportunity, a break in the storm, a path through the mountains, a way to stabilize enough to buy time. Her hands tightened on the yoke. She whispered to herself, "We're not done yet, not today." The jet lurched violently one last time before beginning to level slightly, the worst of the turbulence behind them. Emily's focus sharpened. She was still in the eye of the storm, but she had taken control. She had saved the aircraft from a freefall. She had saved lives. For now. But she knew this was only the beginning. The cockpit smelled of burnt wiring and scorched metal. Smoke swirled like ghosts around the instruments, and the faint orange glow of sparking electronics reflected off Emily Carter's determined face. The plane had leveled slightly, but only barely. Every system was on the brink of total failure. The vibrations beneath their feet felt like the heartbeat of a dying beast. Reed Carter's eyes fluttered open, sluggish and unfocused. He coughed violently, choking on smoke that had crept past the oxygen mask. His uniform was streaked with sweat and grime, his face pale under the harsh cockpit lighting. He tried to reach for the yoke but collapsed back against the seat, his strength spent. "Emily, don't," he rasped, voice barely audible above the alarms. She leaned over him, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling the rapid, shallow pulse. "SHH, just breathe. I've got you," she said, her tone calm but commanding. There was no room for hesitation. Not now. Not when the aircraft teetered on the edge of disaster. The co-pilot, still clutching the secondary yoke, looked at her with wide, unbelieving eyes. We're losing her. I can't hold her steady." Emily didn't hesitate. She slid fully into the left seat, positioning herself with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours in the cockpit of failing aircraft, of someone who had stared death in the face and come back. Every muscle, every nerve, every reflex was honed to perfection. "Listen to me," she said, her voice cutting through the roaring alarms and turbulence. "Follow my lead. We'll get through this, but you have to trust me completely." The co-pilot nodded, swallowing hard, and obeyed her precise instructions. The aircraft pitched violently again, tossing them sideways, the metal groaning under stress. Sparks erupted from the main control panel, sending tiny arcs of electricity dancing in the air. Emily's hands moved smoothly over the yoke, compensating for the failing hydraulics and unresponsive stabilizers. She scanned the instruments quickly. Left hydraulic line gone, right engine overheating, stabilizers partially functional, tail rudder offline. Every system was compromised. Every option was dangerous. But she was in control. Not just in control, she was the only thing keeping this aircraft from plunging into the mountains below. "Emily," Reed croaked, coughing violently. "I-ka." She placed a hand over his, gently pressing him back against the seat. "You don't need to, just breathe. Focus on breathing. That's all you do." The co-pilot's voice trembled as he watched her work. You've done this before." Emily didn't answer. She didn't have time for explanations. Her eyes were fixed on the failing instruments, on the tumbling altitude, on the yawing wings. Her mind calculated vectors, altitudes, wind speeds, and thrust capacity simultaneously. She visualized every micro-adjustment required to stabilize the aircraft. The aircraft lurched again, violently, throwing loose equipment across the cockpit. Emily's hands moved instinctively, countering the roll and pitch, stabilizing what should have been uncontrollable. The plane groaned in protest, alarms screaming, lights flickering, but it remained in the air, just barely. In the back of her mind, Emily recognized the subtle signs of impending disaster: micro-fractures in the fuselage panels, heat building in the remaining hydraulic lines, the faint smell of melting insulation. Every second counted. Every second was a test of precision, instinct, and nerve. "Altitude dropping fast," the co-pilot shouted, panic threading his voice. Emily adjusted throttle and trim simultaneously, pushing the aircraft to its physical limits. She felt every vibration, every micro-shift of weight, every pulse of the engines. She was in perfect harmony with the failing aircraft, guiding it with instinct honed over years of impossible situations. "Keep her steady," she commanded, voice calm but firm. "Follow my adjustments, don't fight me, just do exactly as I say." The co-pilot obeyed, mirroring her movements, his hands trembling. Sparks erupted from the console again, a loud pop sending a small plume of smoke into the cockpit. Emily ignored it, focusing solely on the aircraft's balance, on every failing system, on the lives depending on her. Reed's coughs grew weaker. His breathing was shallow. Emily's eyes flicked to him, assessing his condition even as she manipulated the controls. She knew she couldn't rely on him, he was incapacitated. She was the only pilot left, the only hope. The mountains below loomed like jagged teeth. Lightning illuminated their black ridges intermittently, and the storm clouds above churned violently, reflecting the chaos inside the aircraft. The jet shuddered as wind gusts tore at the wings, threatening to throw them off balance entirely. Emily's hands tightened on the yoke. Every movement was precise, every adjustment calculated. She banked the plane, then leveled, compensating for the failing stabilizers and the yawing tail. The aircraft responded barely. Alarms continued to scream. Lights flickered like strobe signals warning of imminent failure. She keyed the intercom. "All crew brace for extreme turbulence. Secure yourself. Eyes forward. We're not done yet." The passengers in the cabin were gripping their armrests, wide-eyed and pale. Some whispered prayers. Some screamed. Emily didn't glance at them. She didn't have time. Their survival depended on her. A violent lurch threw the co-pilot sideways. Emily steadied him with a gentle press on his shoulder. "Focus. Follow my lead." He nodded, trembling. "Yes, ma'am." Emily's mind raced through every emergency maneuver she had ever trained for. They were all theoretical. Now they were real. Every second of hesitation, every miscalculated adjustment could mean death for everyone on board. She visualized the trajectory, the altitude, the emergency landing possibilities. None were ideal. None guaranteed survival, but she had to choose. Another violent shudder ran through the aircraft. Sparks erupted from an exposed circuit near the navigation panel, and smoke thickened in the cockpit. The alarm screamed louder. Emily adjusted the yoke, compensating for the failing left stabilizer. She banked the plane hard to the right, feeling the fuselage twist under the strain. The engines whined, threatening to fail completely. "Brace for sudden drop," she commanded into the intercom. The plane pitched downward sharply, and passengers screamed. Cargo shifted violently, hitting walls and seats. Emily countered immediately, yoke moving in a fluid, practiced motion. The aircraft leveled just enough to prevent a catastrophic dive. Reed groaned weakly. "Emily, I can't." She pressed his shoulder gently. "You don't have to, I've got her." The co-pilot's voice trembled. "You're saving us all." Emily didn't answer. She focused. Every muscle, every reflex, every ounce of strength went into guiding the crippled aircraft. She had to keep the plane in the air long enough to find a safe path through the storm and mountains. One mistake could cost hundreds of lives. Another lurch, sparks, smoke, alarms, but the aircraft, defying odds, remained airborne. Emily was working at the edge of human and mechanical limits, guiding a failing plane with the precision of a master pilot and the courage of someone who refused to fail. Minutes felt like hours. Every second was a battle. Every microadjustment a fight against gravity, physics, and chaos. And Emily Carter, Sparrow, was winning. For now. But she knew the fight was far from over. The storm was not just outside the aircraft. It was inside, in every failing system, in every trembling panel, in every gasp and scream from the cabin. And she had to navigate both to survive. She tightened her grip on the yoke, eyes scanning instruments, calculating, predicting, anticipating. They were teetering on the edge of disaster, and she was the only thing holding them back. Emily Carter had become the aircraft. Every vibration, every shudder, every warning light flowed through her. She was no longer just the pilot's wife. She was the pilot, the only pilot left. And the lives of everyone on board depended entirely on her. The cockpit was a war zone. Smoke curled in jagged ribbons around the sparking consoles. The faint orange glow from burned circuitry flickered across Emily Carter's face, casting her features in a harsh, almost otherworldly light. The aircraft was trembling violently, and alarms screamed with relentless urgency. Every second was a test, every breath a battle against chaos. Reed Carter slumped back, his chest heaving, sweat streaked across his pale face. His eyes, wide with panic, darted between Emily and the failing instruments. I caw. Emily pressed her hand gently on his shoulder, holding him steady. "You don't have to," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the cacophony. "I've got this, just breathe." The co-pilot's hands were white-knuckled on the yoke, sweat pouring down his temples. We're not going to make it," he whispered, voice trembling. Emily's eyes didn't leave the instruments. Every gauge, every light, every trembling panel was a puzzle she had to solve. Her fingers adjusted the throttle and yoke with surgical precision, compensating for the failing hydraulics and the unresponsive stabilizers. The aircraft groaned under the strain, metal creaking ominously, sparks erupting from a nearby panel, yet she guided it through each violent pitch and yaw as if it were an extension of her own body. She keyed the radio, her calm but commanding tone cutting through the static. "Mayday, this is Sparrow. All crew prepare for emergency maneuvering. I am taking control." There was silence on the other end. Then a crackling voice replied, disbelief etched into every word. "Sparrow, that can't be right." Emily's jaw set. "It's right," she said quietly. "And we don't have much time. Follow my instructions exactly. Every second counts." The co-pilot glanced at her, eyes wide, realization dawning. "You're the Sparrow." She didn't answer. She didn't have time. The plane lurched violently, tossing them side to side. Sparks erupted again and smoke curled thickly around her, but she remained composed, every movement precise. Outside, storm clouds churned, lightning illuminating jagged mountain peaks. Rain lashed the fuselage, turning the world outside into a gray, violent blur. The aircraft shuddered again as a gust of wind caught the failing wing. Emily adjusted the yoke, trimming the plane just enough to maintain level flight. The engines groaned, threatening to stall completely. "Altitude dropping fast," the co-pilot shouted, panic edging his voice. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Not if I can help it. Maintain your hold on the yoke. Don't fight me. Trust me." The co-pilot nodded, trembling. He mirrored her subtle adjustments, helping stabilize the crippled aircraft. Sparks erupted from another console, and a faint hiss of escaping hydraulic fluid filled the cockpit. Reed coughed violently, gripping his seat for support. Emily's gaze flicked to him, assessing his condition even as her hands moved with lightning precision over the yoke and throttle. She had to make decisions quickly. The left hydraulic line was gone. The right engine was overheating. Stabilizers were partially functional. Tail rudder unresponsive. Every system failure was a death sentence if mismanaged. Yet she maneuvered with flawless skill, microadjusting every movement to compensate for failing systems, pushing the aircraft to its limits and beyond. Emily spoke calmly into the intercom, her voice a lifeline to terrified passengers. "All crew brace for extreme turbulence. Secure yourself. Eyes forward. We are not done yet. Trust me." In the cabin, passengers gripped their armrests, wide-eyed, pale, some whispering frantic prayers, some screaming in fear. Emily didn't glance at them. She didn't have time. Their survival depended entirely on her. Reed groaned weakly. "Emily, you can't." "SHH, I've got this," she whispered. Her focus sharpened. Every micro-adjustment of the yoke, every subtle twist of the throttle, every calculation in her mind was executed with precision. She visualized trajectories, altitude margins, wind gusts, and the aircraft's failing systems, adapting instantly to each new challenge. The storm outside raged as if aware of their struggle. Lightning flashed across jagged mountain ridges, illuminating the dark, violent sky. Rain pounded the fuselage. Wind gusts threatened to throw the aircraft into uncontrollable spins. And yet, through all this chaos, Emily remained the calm center of the storm. Her eyes flicked over the instruments again, assessing every failing system. Sparks shot from a console near the co-pilot. Smoke thickened. Panels were dislodging under stress. But she pushed onward, steadying the aircraft, micromanaging its balance, its speed, its trajectory with the precision of a master pilot. The co-pilot swallowed hard. "You've done this before." Emily didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her every movement was a statement of experience, skill, and authority. Sparks erupted from the main console again, a loud pop sending a small flame into the air. Emily adjusted the yoke and throttles in perfect harmony, stabilizing the aircraft just enough to avoid catastrophe. Reed's breathing grew shallow. He leaned back, exhausted and incapacitated. The co-pilot struggled to follow her lead. Outside, jagged peaks rushed closer through the cockpit window, black against the stormy gray. The aircraft pitched violently again, the fuselage groaning in protest. Emily's hands tightened on the yoke. Every movement was calculated, every decision deliberate. She tilted the aircraft, compensating for failing stabilizers and yawing rudder. Sparks flew, smoke thickened, and alarms screamed, yet the plane remained in the air. Barely. She keyed the radio again. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Sparrow. We are in critical condition. Follow my instructions. I repeat, follow my instructions. We will survive, but only if we work together." Another crackling voice came through, disbelief thick in the words. "Sparrow, is that really?" Emily's jaw tightened. "Yes, I am Sparrow, and I am taking full control. Copy my commands exactly." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face, calm, focused, and unflinching. The aircraft pitched violently, threatening to throw the co-pilot into the panels. Emily's hands adjusted the yoke and throttle simultaneously, stabilizing the plane just enough to maintain altitude. The co-pilot gasped. I didn't think you were real. I thought you were a legend." Emily didn't respond. There was no time for legends, for history, for disbelief. There was only the aircraft, the storm, and the lives on board. She leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning instruments, evaluating every failing system. Sparks erupted from the navigation console, smoke curling thickly around her face. Reed groaned weakly, barely conscious. Emily pressed a hand gently to his shoulder, grounding him. The storm outside raged with renewed fury. The mountains below were black teeth against the gray sky. The aircraft shuddered under the violent winds. Rain lashed the fuselage, obscuring the world outside the cockpit. Emily adjusted the yoke and throttles in perfect synchronization, pushing the aircraft to its limits and keeping it just above the mountains. She spoke again into the intercom, calm and commanding. "All crew, secure yourself. Passengers, brace. We are not done yet. Trust me, we will survive this." Minutes stretched like hours. Every vibration, every shudder, every alarm was a test. Emily's hands, precise and steady, guided the aircraft with unmatched skill. She had become the plane. Every failing system, every gust of wind, every violent pitch flowed through her like a symphony of chaos, and she conducted it flawlessly. The co-pilot mirrored her adjustments, following her lead. Sparks and smoke continued to erupt from the console, but Emily ignored them. The aircraft was alive, screaming, fighting against gravity and failure, and she kept it in the sky. Reed coughed violently again. "Emily, you're saving us all." She didn't speak, she focused. She had to. The aircraft lurched once more, violently, and Emily countered, guiding it through the chaos with flawless precision. She had taken full control. She had assumed command. She was Sparrow. And now everyone on board, crew, passengers, and pilot alike, understood. Survival depended entirely on her. The storm outside was merciless. Rain pounded the fuselage in relentless sheets, hammering the aircraft like the fists of an angry giant. Lightning arced across the blackened sky, illuminating the jagged mountains below in brief, terrifying bursts. The plane shuddered violently with every gust of wind, and the sound of metal twisting under stress echoed through the cabin. Sparks erupted from the overloaded panels in the cockpit, trailing smoke that curled like ghostly fingers toward the ceiling. Emily Carter, Sparrow, did not flinch. Her eyes were locked on the instruments, her hands moving instinctively over the yoke and throttles, micro-adjusting the aircraft's trajectory. Every decision, every adjustment was critical. One wrong move, one misjudgment, 1 second of hesitation, and the plane and everyone on board would be obliterated against the unforgiving mountains. Reed Carter slumped back, nearly unconscious, sweat streaked down his face. His breathing was shallow and ragged. The co-pilot's hands were trembling as he assisted where he could, but it was clear he was overwhelmed. Emily didn't have the luxury of waiting. She was the only pilot left capable of keeping this aircraft alive. She keyed the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Sparrow. We are in extreme distress. All crew prepare for immediate emergency maneuvering. Repeat, immediate maneuvering required. I am taking full control." Static crackled over the radio. Then a shaky voice replied, disbelief in every syllable. "Sparrow, you're real, the legend." Emily's jaw tightened. "Real enough, and we don't have time for history lessons. Listen carefully. Follow my instructions. If you do exactly as I say, we survive." She glanced at the instruments. The left hydraulic system was completely offline. The right engine was overheating and threatening to fail. Stabilizers were partially unresponsive. Tail rudder completely gone. Every system failure was catastrophic, yet she had to push the aircraft to its limits. The mountains below loomed like black and jagged teeth. Lightning flickered across their peaks, illuminating the danger in brief, blinding flashes. Emily took a deep breath, visualizing the route through the storm. There was a narrow valley ahead, a potential lifeline, but it would require a daring maneuver to thread the crippled plane through it. Any miscalculation, any hesitation, and they would crash instantly. She turned to the co-pilot. "We have one chance, a narrow path through the valley. If we don't take it, the storm will tear us apart. Can you follow my lead?" The co-pilot swallowed hard. I'll follow you, ma'am. Just tell me what to do." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Keep your hands on the yoke. Match my adjustments. Don't fight me. Trust me completely." The plane lurched violently as a sudden gust of wind caught the wing. Sparks shot from the console and smoke curled toward the ceiling, stinging Emily's eyes. She ignored it, adjusting throttle and trim, banking the plane with microsecond precision. The aircraft groaned under the stress, metal creaking, alarms screaming, but it remained airborne. Reed coughed violently, barely able to speak. "Emily, I can't." "You don't have to," she said, voice calm, almost soothing. "I've got this, just breathe." Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury. Rain hammered the fuselage, wind gusts threatened to rip the aircraft apart, and lightning struck dangerously close, illuminating the chaos. The valley ahead was a knife's edge between survival and death. Emily calculated distances, altitudes, and angles in a fraction of a second. Every adjustment mattered. "Prepare for turbulence," she shouted into the intercom, her voice cutting through the screams and panic of the passengers. "Secure yourself, eyes forward. We have one chance, trust me." The aircraft pitched violently downward as she maneuvered toward the valley entrance. Sparks flew from the main control panel, smoke thickening in the cockpit. The co-pilot mirrored her movements, hands trembling, following her lead. Every micro-adjustment of throttle and yoke was a lifeline. Every tilt, turn, and compensation was critical. Emily's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She visualized the path through the valley, calculating how to thread the crippled plane between jagged peaks while compensating for wind gusts and failing systems. The valley was narrow, unforgiving, but it was their only chance. Lightning illuminated the mountains again, revealing a particularly jagged ridge on the right. Emily banked sharply, countering the turbulence with micro-adjustments that required perfect timing and precision. The fuselage groaned, panels rattling, alarms blaring, but she held the aircraft steady. Reed groaned weakly. "Emily, you're insane." She didn't answer. Insanity wasn't an option here. Survival was. Her focus was absolute. The plane dipped and swayed as she guided it into the valley entrance. Jagged rock walls loomed on either side, black and menacing, rain lashing against the fuselage. The wind howled through the narrow corridor, threatening to rip control surfaces off. Emily adjusted throttle and trim, banking the plane just enough to clear a particularly sharp overhang. Sparks erupted from a panel near the co-pilot, smoke curling dangerously close to their faces. The co-pilot's voice trembled. I can't believe this, you're actually doing it." Emily's eyes never left the instruments. She had no time for disbelief, for fear, for hesitation. Every micro-adjustment had to be perfect. The aircraft groaned, twisting under stress, but she guided it forward inch by inch through the storm. A sudden downdraft hit the plane, pitching it violently downward. Emily reacted instantly, pulling back on the yoke while adjusting throttle to prevent a catastrophic drop. Sparks exploded from the navigation console and smoke thickened. The co-pilot gritted his teeth, following her lead, matching her every move. Reed coughed violently again, exhausted and barely conscious. Emily pressed a hand gently to his shoulder. "Just breathe, trust me. We're getting through this." The valley narrowed further. Rain pounded the fuselage, wind gusts buffeted the wings, and lightning illuminated jagged rocks that could rip the aircraft apart. Emily adjusted the yoke, banking the plane with microsecond precision. The co-pilot followed her every move, and slowly, ever so slowly, they threaded the crippled aircraft through the jagged corridor. Minutes passed like hours. Every vibration, every shudder, every alarm was a test. Emily's hands, precise and unflinching, guided the plane with flawless skill. The engines whined, the fuselage groaned, and sparks flew from multiple consoles, yet the aircraft remained airborne. Finally, through a final, violent lurch, the valley opened into a slightly wider space. The plane leveled just enough to gain some stability. Rain lashed the fuselage, wind gusts buffeted the wings, but Emily had done it. She had navigated the impossible, threading the crippled aircraft through the heart of the storm and mountains. Reed's eyes were wide with disbelief. "Emily, you saved us." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hands were still on the yoke, her eyes scanning instruments, her mind calculating the next steps. They were not out of danger yet, but for the first time in what felt like eternity, the plane was stable. The co-pilot exhaled shakily. I can't believe it, you're Sparrow." Emily allowed herself a brief nod. "We're not out of this yet," she said, "but we're alive for now." The passengers in the cabin were trembling, clutching their armrests, faces pale but alive. Emily's calm, unwavering presence had carried them through the worst of the storm. But the crisis was far from over. The aircraft was still crippled, the systems failing, and the storm was not yet behind them. Emily Carter Sparrow was the only thing keeping them alive, and she would not fail. The storm had not relented. Outside, the sky was a furious wall of black and gray, lightning tearing across it like the flash of blades. Rain pelted the aircraft relentlessly, the fuselage vibrating under each powerful gust of wind. The mountains, now visible below in jagged, shadowed silhouettes, loomed like predators, waiting for the slightest misstep. Every mile forward was a gamble. Every second was measured against gravity, turbulence, and failing systems. Emily Carter Sparrow kept her eyes locked on the instruments, scanning every gauge, every flickering light, every trembling panel. Sparks erupted intermittently from the console, sending arcs of fire into the smoky air. Smoke curled upward, stinging her eyes and filling the cockpit with a choking haze. Yet she remained focused, hands steady on the yoke, muscles coiled and ready to compensate for the plane's every twitch. The co-pilot, pale and shaking, mirrored her movements as best he could, hands white-knuckled on the secondary yoke. Reed Carter slumped further, coughing violently, nearly unconscious. Emily's focus did not waver. She was the only one who could bring this crippled aircraft to safety. Her mind ran through every emergency scenario she had ever trained for, and every contingency she hadn't. Hydraulic lines were nearly gone. The right engine was overheating, stabilizers partially offline, rudder unresponsive. They had survived the storm so far, but the final challenge awaited. The descent to a makeshift landing strip on the far side of the mountains, a strip barely long enough for a commercial aircraft, under conditions no pilot would willingly face. She keyed the radio, her voice calm but commanding over the static. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Sparrow. All crew, secure passengers. We are initiating final descent to emergency landing zone. Follow instructions exactly. Survival depends on it." A crackling voice responded, disbelief thick in the words. "Sparrow, is that real? The legend?" Emily's jaw tightened. "Real enough. Now listen. Time to land. Everyone secure. Eyes forward. Trust me." The valley below narrowed further as they descended, rain whipping across the cockpit windows, reducing visibility to mere feet. Jagged peaks loomed on either side, each one a potential grave. Emily adjusted throttle and trim with precise micro-movements, banking the plane just enough to thread through the narrowing corridor. The fuselage groaned, alarms screamed, and sparks flew from overloaded circuits. "Brace for turbulence," Emily shouted into the intercom. Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic, cutting through the chaos in the cabin. "Secure yourself, eyes forward. We have one chance, trust me." The co-pilot mirrored her every adjustment, white-knuckled and wide-eyed. He tried to speak, but Emily cut him off with a glance. There was no time for words, only action, only precision, only survival. The mountains seemed to close in, shadows flickering under intermittent flashes of lightning. Rain-slicked ridges rose sharply on either side. The aircraft shuddered violently as wind gusts tore at the wings, threatening to spin them into jagged peaks. Emily's hands moved instinctively, countering the turbulence, banking and trimming. She could feel every micro-shift of the plane, every failing control, every ounce of imbalance. Reed groaned weakly. "Emily, you're insane." She ignored him. Insanity had no place here. Survival did. The makeshift landing strip came into view, a narrow stretch of tarmac carved into the mountainside, barely long enough to stop a plane of this size. Lightning illuminated it intermittently, and she could see debris from previous emergency landings scattered along the edges. There was no room for error. One miscalculation, one late adjustment, and they would crash into the mountains. Emily adjusted throttle and yoke simultaneously, compensating for the failing left stabilizer and the unresponsive tail rudder. The aircraft pitched slightly, then leveled as she guided it toward the strip. Sparks erupted from the navigation console again, smoke curling thickly, but she didn't flinch. She had done the impossible before. She could do it again. "Prepare for final approach," she commanded over the intercom. "Brace, secure, eyes forward." The co-pilot mirrored her adjustments perfectly, trembling as he followed her every movement. Outside, the storm raged, rain slashing against the fuselage, wind gusts buffeting the wings. The mountains loomed menacingly on either side. Every second, every movement, every decision was critical. Emily's mind raced through calculations at lightning speed. Distance, speed, altitude, wind velocity, hydraulic pressure, throttle capacity, all had to be balanced perfectly. One misstep, one microsecond too late, and they would be destroyed. The fuselage groaned under stress. Sparks flew from the electronics near Reed's seat. Smoke filled the cockpit, stinging eyes and lungs. Reed coughed violently, barely conscious. Emily pressed a hand gently to his shoulder. "Just breathe, trust me. We're alive, almost." The aircraft pitched violently as a gust of wind hit the wing. Emily countered instantly, micro-adjusting throttle and yoke to stabilize the descent. She guided the crippled aircraft closer to the landing strip, threading it through jagged peaks with millimeter-perfect precision. The strip loomed closer, wet and slick. Debris littered the edges. Emily's hands tightened on the yoke. Every micro-adjustment mattered. The engines whined, the fuselage groaned, but the aircraft remained under control. She keyed the radio again. "All crew, brace for final landing. This is the only chance. Secure yourselves, eyes forward, trust Sparrow." The co-pilot exhaled shakily. I can't believe this. You're actually saving us." Emily didn't respond. She focused. Every microsecond, every adjustment, every decision was life or death. The aircraft descended rapidly, engines screaming, wind buffeting the fuselage, lightning illuminating jagged peaks around them. Sparks erupted from the main panel, smoke thickening. Yet she guided the plane with unmatched precision. The strip was almost beneath them now. Narrow, slick, unforgiving. Emily adjusted throttle and yoke perfectly, compensating for tail rudder failure, for hydraulic issues, for every failing system. The fuselage trembled violently as wheels aligned with the tarmac. She eased the throttle, guiding the plane down with flawless timing. Metal screeched against the wet runway as wheels touched down. Sparks erupted from overloaded circuits, alarms still blaring, but the aircraft remained intact. Emily applied reverse thrust and brakes carefully, navigating the damaged plane along the slick surface. The co-pilot breathed a long, shaky sigh. We made it. Reed's eyes widened, disbelief etched across his face. Emily, you saved us all. Emily allowed herself a brief, exhausted smile. She didn't speak. She kept her eyes on the instruments, guiding the plane to a full stop. The engines whined as she cut them, and the aircraft finally settled completely, shaking but intact. The passengers erupted into cautious cheers, still clutching armrests but alive. Crew members stared at her, awed, trembling. The storm continued outside, but inside, a moment of relief, a moment of survival. Emily Carter Sparrow had done the impossible. She had taken a crippled aircraft, threaded it through a deadly storm and jagged mountains, and brought it safely to the ground. Every life on board depended entirely on her, and she had not failed. Yet even in that moment of triumph, Emily's eyes scanned the cockpit. Sparks still flickered from damaged panels, smoke lingered in the air, systems remained precarious. The crisis wasn't entirely over, but they were alive. And for Emily Carter Sparrow, the fight, the mission, the responsibility would never be over. The aircraft sat on the emergency strip, its fuselage battered, smoke curling faintly from panels, tires wet and streaked with mud from the rain-soaked runway. Outside, the storm had not fully passed, but the worst of it had receded, leaving jagged clouds and intermittent lightning streaks that illuminated the mountains like cold, jagged teeth. The passengers, pale, trembling, and shaken to their core, were slowly emerging from their seats. Crew members moved cautiously, checking for injuries, murmuring words of disbelief, awe, and gratitude. Inside the cockpit, Emily Carter Sparrow finally exhaled. Her hands loosened on the yoke, now resting in her lap. Sweat streaked her face, mixing with soot from the smoke that had crept through the cabin. Her uniform was torn and streaked with grime, hair damp and plastered to her forehead. She leaned back, feeling the adrenaline slowly ebb, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. Reed Carter stirred in his seat, pale but conscious. His hand shook as he reached for Emily. "Emily, I can't believe you." She pressed a hand gently over his, squeezing it once. "You don't have to believe. We're alive. That's what matters." The co-pilot slumped in his chair, exhaustion and disbelief etched across his face. I've never seen anything like that. You saved all of us." Emily's eyes met his, steady, unwavering. "We did it together, but I was in control. Someone had to be." Word of the miracle spread quickly. Passengers were being guided from the aircraft to waiting rescue vehicles, murmuring in awe, some crying silently, others hugging each other as though sheer relief could expel the lingering fear. Yet all eyes occasionally flicked back to the cockpit, where a woman, once perceived as just the pilot's wife, had become the linchpin between life and death. Emily finally stepped from the cockpit, moving carefully down the aisle. Each footstep was deliberate. She didn't yet trust gravity fully after the ordeal. Passengers turned, recognition dawning on their faces, whispers rippling like waves through the cabin. "That's her, she's the pilot." "No, the pilot's wife, right?" A young mother, clutching her child, pointed. "No, that's the Sparrow, she's the Sparrow they talk about, the legend." Emily allowed herself a faint, tired smile but said nothing. Words were unnecessary. The proof was here, alive, breathing, intact. Outside, emergency personnel had begun their careful approach, floodlights cutting through the mist and rain, shining onto the damaged aircraft. Paramedics hurried to the passengers, checking for injuries, murmuring reassurances. Fire crews inspected the fuselage for lingering sparks. And above all, the story had begun to crystallize in the minds of those present. This was no ordinary landing. This was heroism in its rawest form. Colonel Ray, head of the response team and someone who had served alongside Emily in classified operations, arrived at the scene, drenched but composed. His eyes scanned the aircraft, then found Emily stepping carefully down the stairs. Recognition flickered in his gaze. Relief, respect, awe. "Sparrow," he said, voice low but commanding, "you've done what no one thought possible." Emily straightened, shoulders weary but squared. "It wasn't just me. The co-pilot, Reed, the crew, they all played their part. I just guided them." Colonel Ray's eyes softened. "Guided them? You saved every single life on this aircraft. Everyone will know your name. Everyone will remember this day." Emily nodded, not out of pride but fatigue. Pride had no place here. Survival did. Yet even in the exhaustion, there was a flicker of something human, relief, quiet satisfaction that she had lived up to the expectations and surpassed them. News helicopters began to circle the area, their spotlights cutting through the fatting storm. Cameras were already rolling, journalists murmuring into microphones, recording every step, every expression. The story was going viral before the ink on their emergency reports was dry. A young reporter, eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination, approached. "Ms. Carter, Sparrow, can you tell us what happened? How did you manage to land in that storm?" Emily looked at the helicopters, at the flashing cameras, at the buzzing reporters. Her hands tightened on the railing as she descended to the tarmac. She knew her words would travel across the country, across the world. And yet, she only spoke what was true. "It wasn't luck," she said, voice calm, strong, unwavering. "It was training, it was focus. And it was every person on that plane trusting each other and trusting me to guide us through. That's how we survived. That's how we landed." The reporter scribbled notes furiously, then stepped back, all clear in his expression. Other media crews were already positioning cameras, some shouting questions into the wind. Emily answered a few with simple, concise truths. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The story told itself through the wrecked aircraft, the exhausted passengers, and the miracle that had just unfolded. Meanwhile, Reed Carter, still pale but slowly regaining composure, stood beside her. His hands shook as he reached out to embrace her. "Emily, I thought I'd lost you. I don't have words." She hugged him back, brief but firm. "You don't need words, we made it. That's all that matters." Emergency teams guided passengers away, but the murmurs continued. Whispers of "Sparrow, she's real, the pilot's wife, no." The legend floated through the crowd. Emily had become a symbol, not just of survival, but of courage, skill, and calm under unimaginable pressure. Colonel Ray stood beside her, watching as Emily spoke with passengers and crew. "You know," he said quietly, "they'll be writing books, making documentaries, social media will explode. Everyone will know your name tomorrow. And yet here you are, still focused on the people. That's what makes you extraordinary." Emily nodded, exhaustion pressing down, but her gaze remained clear, unwavering. "They don't remember the fear. They'll remember that we survived. That's enough for me." Rescue helicopters touched down nearby, personnel rushing to assess any remaining damage and secure the area. The story was no longer just a near-miraculous landing. It had become a national event, the kind of real-life heroism that gripped audiences across social media, news networks, and everyday conversations. Emily stepped forward to meet the passengers as they exited the aircraft. Children clung to parents, frightened but alive. Elderly passengers blinked in disbelief. Soldiers, journalists, civilians, all stared at the woman who had defied odds, who had turned a near-death flight into a survival story that would be told for decades. A young girl, no older than 8, approached Emily cautiously. "Are you really the Sparrow?" she asked, wide-eyed. Emily knelt slightly, meeting the girl's gaze. "Yes, I am, but anyone can be brave. Anyone can survive if they focus, trust, and keep trying. Today, we all survived together." The girl smiled faintly, a mix of awe and inspiration. "I want to be brave like you someday." Emily nodded gently. "You already are, remember that." As the crowd began to disperse, cameras flashing, helicopters hovering, and rescue crews working, Emily finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The storm had been survived. The mountains had been conquered. Lives had been saved. And yet, amid the relief, a quiet, personal victory emerged. She had stepped into the cockpit, taken control, and become more than anyone ever expected. Not just a pilot's wife, not just a legend whispered in stories, she was Sparrow. And the world would never forget it. The aftermath was more than survival. It was heroism, resilience, and undeniable proof that courage, skill, and determination could defy the impossible. Emily Carter stepped away from the aircraft, letting the rain wash over her face, mixing with sweat and soot. Around her, people were alive, cameras were rolling, and the storm had passed. But in her heart, a quiet understanding remained. This was not the end. The world would know her story, and the legend of Sparrow would live forever. And somewhere deep inside, she allowed herself a single thought, whispered under her breath, barely audible over the wind. We survived. We really survived.